questions of policy, Tom Hemingway, Beatty and Tom Hay. I'm Janet McCabe, and I'm going to be chairing this session. It's a debate that I've long participated in, so I'm very much looking forward to the interventions from our participants this afternoon. Before I introduce our illustrious speakers, I'd like to congratulate the organisers at Edge Hill, particularly Weissman, for what I think is a really imaginative spin on the virtual online conference, which I'm sure we've all enjoyed over the last sort of 20 months. But I really love this idea of the conference, which is allowing for slow thinking and longer critical thought. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our three speakers who will present one after the other, and then we will have questions, but there is a chat, so please include your thoughts as we go. So our first speaker is Tom Hemingway, who recently finished his PhD on broadcast comedy television at the University of Warwick. He has a chapter in the forthcoming collection, Binge Watching and Contemporary Television Research by Marika Jenner, who I also see is in the audience. So hello, Marika. Melissa Beatty is our next speaker. She recently received her PhD at Aberystwyth University in 2017. She's published on national identity and television and has taught at universities in the US, South Korea and Pakistan. And later this month, she is joining the faculty of the American University in Armenia as an assistant professor of English and communication. So congratulations. But as we were saying before, you can become our roving television scholar in Armenia. Last, by no means least, is Tom May. He is a third-year PhD candidate in television history at Northumberland University. His funded project is about BBC One's Play for Today, this groundbreaking anthology strand from 1970 to 84. And his work focuses on its place in British television history, its aesthetics and style, reception and representation. His PhD also involves conducting oral histories with those involved in Play for Today. And I'm looking forward to hearing more, because I'm sure we will. In 2017, he had a 3-part essay on David Edgar's Play for Today, Destiny, published online at British Television Drama. He's also presented conference papers and blogged about television fictions of the Cold War. He's also written book reviews for the Historical Journal of Film, Radio and Television, as well as the Journal of British Cinema and Television, and he's also written for The Conversation. So without further ado, we'll turn over the mic to Tom Hemingway.
Okay, great. Thank you, Janet. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully this works fine. Right, so can you see me? Am I on?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Right, so yeah, this work forms part of my PhD thesis and is concerned with adult animated comedy programs on post-broadcast streaming platforms. It is worth mentioning up front that this subgenre of adult animation isn't exclusive to streaming platforms. In its broadcast form, adult animated comedy often shares a similar animation style to children's television, with a large part of the humor evolving from the contrast between the content and its form. So this is certainly true of shows like Family Guy, which is a family sitcom which mixes explicitly sexual humor with a visual style reminiscent of the more family-friendly Fox cartoon, The Simpsons. Alternately, the animation could be crude, as evidenced in programs like Beavis and Butthead, and reflect a cynical attitude typical of the Gen X society from which the programs emerged. Donnelly historicizes the arrival of the adult animation in television, stating, in the 1990s, there was a proliferation of successful television cartoons aimed more at adults, or at least aimed less specifically at children. He goes on to define some of the recurring characteristics and tropes of the adult animation, noting how sex and violence were often on the agenda in these types of programs, and that these particular factors appeal to the juvenile in adults. So this paper proposes that there's an obvious continuum between the humour found in these broadcast adult animated comedies like Family Guy and Beavis and Butthead, and the post-broadcast streaming adult animated comedies that you can find on Netflix. I do wish to extend Donnelly's assertions regarding the types of humour that are present in these shows, however. So sex and violence are still on the agenda in these programs, except rather than appealing solely to the juvenile in adults, in the same way as Family Guy and South Park, shows like Netflix's BoJack Horseman, which I'll be focusing on today, attempt to cater to an adult, mature sensibility, which can be equated with the way quality television appealed to viewers in the 90s and 2000s in series like The Sopranos and Mad Men. In a 2018 article for The Guardian, Ariel Bernstein writes, "For years now, the anti-hero saga has been the mainstay in prestige TV, and there has been an overwhelming assumption that shows centered on the lives of good, earnest people are simply not as sexy. This trend is continued by BoJack Horseman, whose titular character is often positioned by the show as an anti-hero in the same vein as Don Draper or Tony Soprano. The show also closely follows the narrative tradition of the prestige network drama, as opposed to the inconsequential narratives of many broadcast adult animations, which often reset at the start of each episode." So thinking about BoJack Horseman specifically then, if one was to discount Netflix's revival of Arrested Development, which was previously a Fox show, then BoJack Horseman was their first original comedy series and the first of many adult animations, premiering in August 2014. Its status as the first adult animation on Netflix, particularly one which has become so successful, has most likely led to the proliferation of the subgenre on the platform. There have been multiple season renewals of programs like Big Mouth, Disenchantment, F is for Family, and Paradise PD, which are all pictured here, which indicates an ongoing interest in the subgenre by both the company and their audience. BoJack is by no means representative of all post-broadcast adult animated comedies, but based on its critical reception, marketing, and online fan discourse, it can certainly be viewed as one of the most heavily promoted and widely discussed Netflix original programs. The show concerns an alcoholic, washed-up 90s sitcom actor who, throughout the show's 6 seasons, makes numerous attempts to re-enter the limelight and prevent his life from spiraling further downward. The setting is present-day Hollywood, but its inhabitants are a mixture of humans and anthropomorphic animals who coexist peacefully and rarely comment on the absurdity of this mixed species situation. The show often relies on this mixture of humans and animals in its version of Hollywood to generate comedy, which most frequently takes the form of visual puns and witty wordplay, such as the filmmaker Cameron Crowe being depicted as an actual crow, or Quentin Tarantino becoming Quentin Tarantulino, an enthusiastic 8-legged arachnid director. The show is created by Raphael Bob Waxberg, who, until the arrival of BoJack Horseman, was relatively unknown, with only one writing credit to his name. Importantly, the success of the show has allowed Bob Waxberg to develop an authorial voice within the medium, similar to television showrunners like Mitch Hurwitz or Matt Groening. His other roles in television since BoJack are as the executive producer of the Netflix adult animated show Tuca and Bertie, and as the co-creator of an adult animated comedy drama for Amazon, which was called Undone. This latter program was Amazon's first foray into the adult animation genre, and the involvement of Bob Waxberg in the project serves as an indicator of BoJack Horseman's success as a show in and of itself, as well as one which is representative of the achievements of Netflix as a producer of original content. So I'm now going to look at some of the continuities between broadcast and post-broadcast adult animated comedies, and something they both share in common is their penchant for violence. The gags are almost always repetitive, such as the constant death of Kenny in South Park, or Stewie Griffin's incessant attempts to kill his mother Lois in Family Guy. But it's through the repetition and the animation style that the viewer is able to find humor in these moments. In BoJack Horseman, there's also moments of violence which, if not animated, would appear far more shocking and substantially less funny than they ultimately are. So there's this example from a first season episode where BoJack's naive and well-meaning housemate Todd finds himself in a threatening prison environment. This moment could be considered cruel and detached if depicted this way in a live action program, but once again, the contrasts which the show creates between the content and its form are where its offbeat source of humor can be located. Another recurring topic which BoJack Horseman deals with is drug use. The depiction of drug use in adult animated comedies isn't uncharted territory. Family Guy's episode The Thin White Line revolves around the Griffin family's dog, Brian, becoming addicted to cocaine after trying it as a sniffer dog in an airport. But BoJack Horseman isn't just concerned with depicting drug use for potential comedic material or for inconsequential narrative digressions. Whilst enabling these, the subject matter allows the show to become a meditation on the driving forces behind addiction, such as fame and childhood trauma. BoJack's persistent drug and alcohol abuse isn't merely an identifiable character trait with no deep-rooted cause. The show goes to great lengths to explain its characters' addictions, and unlike the majority of comedic programs, refuses to let them suffer no consequences for their actions by resetting at the start of each episode. In this respect, the program deviates from the typically low-stake narratives of broadcast adult animation and shares more in common with the character-focused prestige dramas that are associated with HBO and AMC. And here on the right, we have Sarah Lynn, who was one of the child actors on BoJack's sitcom during the 90s. She's now grown up and depicted as an addict by the show. The final and most noticeable similarity I've identified between BoJack Horseman and other broadcast adult animated comedies is its excessively referential humor. The most recognizable type of reference is to various facets of popular culture and the entertainment industry. The show often refers to television, particularly the sitcom subgenre, as a target for comedy, as well as a topic which is closely tied to the narrative. The explicit references to shows like Full House and Seinfeld are amusing in the faithfulness and specificity of their callbacks, indicating a reverence for the broadcast television comedy genre, whilst also indicating that these shows are something other than what BoJack Horseman is attempting to do as a post-broadcast program. In this regard, the show's tone and style of humor can be regarded as a postmodern one, using multiple references from popular TV culture to reflect on the world depicted in the diegesis of the show. Moreover, through these references, the viewer can understand more or less about the characters, depending on how much or how little they know about the popular culture that's being cited. Jim Collins, writing on postmodernism, provides a helpful way of understanding BoJack's referentiality. Collins writes, the effort to reconnect with an audience outside galleries and scholarly journals involved a number of different strategies. One of the most common was to destabilize the relationship between high art and mass culture, primarily through the appropriation of signs drawn from mass media. These signs are present in BoJack Horseman's varied use of television references. However, BoJack Horseman also refers to these examples of mass media alongside references to high culture, such as David Hockney's 1972 painting, Portrait of an Artist, Pool with Two Figures, which hangs behind BoJack's office desk. In the show's version of the painting, the swimming Hockney is replaced by BoJack, who also appears to be stood at the edge of a pool staring down at himself. The painting evokes a sense of isolation, which applies to a character like BoJack and can be used as an instant signifier regarding BoJack's personality and backstory for the viewer, with the cultural capital to understand the reference. Okay, so BoJack's emphasis on character and divergence from the zero consequence narrative of many other adult animated programs doesn't automatically place it within the realm of the prestige cable drama. But I do think the show is ultimately able to support these comparisons through its handling of multiple plot threads and in its tonal seesawing between absurd comedy and extreme tragedy. In an in-depth review of the show for the AV Club, Les Chappell writes, for all its bright colours, absurd images, and plethora of puns, it's a show whose path is littered with broken things, a dark and uncompromising world more on par with prestige cable dramas. Moreover, the paratextual marketing material created for the show by Netflix proudly places it within this category of television. The inclusion of the name Underwood on the list of character names from the show's third season poster, which you can see here on the left, also serves to further promote the Netflix brand, simultaneously advertising what was then their immensely popular House of Cards series, whilst providing BoJack Horseman with a sort of critical legitimation through association. One doesn't have to search online for too long to also be provided with multiple examples of BoJack Horseman fan art, which draws comparisons between the program and numerous aforementioned drama shows such as Breaking Bad and Mad Men. So my argument here will be illustrated by examining how the third season episode, That's Too Much Man, engages with conventions that have historically been associated with drama television. It begins with a supporting character of Sarah Lynn, who's currently attempting to live a sober lifestyle and leave her troubles with addiction behind her. And I did have a clip here, but it wasn't working. So I've done sort of like an alternate version of the paper, just in case, thankfully. So the opening shot of this episode is a close-up of a painting from Sarah Lynn's bedroom, enveloped in pink curtains and presented with a sense of theatrical importance to the viewer. The painting closely resembles the mid-19th century work Ophelia, which depicts a scene described by Queen Gertrude in Shakespeare's Hamlet, in which the tragic character of Ophelia sings before drowning in a river. Like many of the references to artwork in BoJack Horseman, the show replaces the figure from the paintings with those that we recognize from the show. In this instance, Sarah Lynn is the character in the painting, singing before her untimely and unfortunate demise. The fact that the character then begins this episode by uncharacteristically performing a musical number darkly foreshadows that her fate may be the same as in her painting. This example is evidence of BoJack Horseman utilizing traditional art forms carrying high cultural kudos in the same way that Janet McCabe and Kim Cass argue HBO did through commissioning Annie Leibovitz's photo shoot of the Sopranos cast members in the mid-2000s. Moreover, the decision to open this particular episode, one which will roughly follow the narrative trajectory of the character depicted in the painting with a close-up of the artwork, demonstrates the high level of synthesis and the cohesion between stylistic choices and the program's meanings that Sarah Cardwell believes to be inherent characteristics of quality American television. The decision to begin the episode with an extended introductory sequence featuring Sarah Lynn, a character who longtime viewers will be familiar with, but who has had minimal screen time so far in this season, is also crucial to understanding the role that the show wants BoJack to play within this particular episode. So by emphasizing the importance of Sarah Lynn's sobriety at the start, the show then positions BoJack as an intruder into her attempt at a sober lifestyle, and therefore as the anti-hero of this particular episode. Jason Mattel describes the anti-hero as a character who is our primary point of ongoing narrative alignment, but whose behavior and beliefs provoke ambiguous, conflicted, or negative moral allegiance. This is certainly the case with BoJack and BoJack Horseman, but it should be noted that the anti-hero is most commonly referred to in relation to the television drama genre. Aforementioned shows such as Mad Men, The Sopranos, and Breaking Bad all feature prominently in Mattel's discussion of the anti-hero from his 2015 book, Complex TV. Helpfully, though, there is a single paragraph devoted to how the figure of the anti-hero may be used in the comedy genre, where Mattel refers to unlikable protagonists from shows such as The Office and Seinfeld. Mattel writes, in nearly all of these comedic instances, we are positioned as rooting against the unsympathetic heroes, watching them fail for our amusement, as well as laughing at their boundary-pushing behavioral extremes. In BoJack Horseman, there are moments of humor when characters unwillingly find themselves in problematic situations, such as when BoJack's housemate Todd is incarcerated in the first season. However, these problems and the pleasures that we derive from them these problems and the pleasures we derive from them are almost always resolved within the episode and don't have extensive narrative repercussions further down the line. The main difference is that we ultimately still root for BoJack, and the question Mattel is left with resonates far more with a show like this than the aforementioned comedy shows like The Office and Seinfeld. Mattel asks, how do we account for the pleasures of watching a highly unpleasant protagonist at the center of a dramatic narrative that asks us to truly care about his actions and potentially encourages our allegiance? This figure of the misanthropic, selfish, but ultimately redeemable hero is a type of anti-hero that Mattel identifies in dramatic television material, but one which shares more in common with the figure of BoJack Horseman than any of the unsympathetic heroes Mattel believes inhabit the world of television comedy. The ending of this episode offers a final way to read the show as one indebted to narrative-focused serial drama, particularly those focused on anti-heroes. Following Sarah Lynn's request from earlier in the episode, she and BoJack travel to the iconic Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles. It's here that Sarah Lynn overdoses and dies resting on BoJack's shoulder, or rather her death is heavily implied by the end of the show. The death of either a major or long-time supporting character is a recurring trait of serial drama programs, particularly as the show gets closer to its season finale. I have some spoilers here, but all of the show is finished quite a while ago, so I'll let myself off, I think. So examples include Jimmy Darmody in the second season finale of Boardwalk Empire, Jane Margolis in Breaking Bad, Ned Stark in Game of Thrones, and Charlie Pace in the season 3 finale of Lost. In the cases of Boardwalk Empire and Breaking Bad, the deaths are often directly at the hands of the main protagonist or occur as a result of the main protagonist's actions. These deaths often say less about the character who dies than the character who is responsible, and their occurrence towards the end of a season will allow the viewer to consider how the main protagonist will respond to the situation and how it has changed or will change them. In BoJack Horseman, it is his selfishness and inability to understand Sarah Lynn's struggles as an addict which lead to her untimely death. Choosing this death to occur at the end of the penultimate episode, choosing this death to occur at the end of the penultimate episode will arguably encourage binging amongst the majority of Netflix viewers who can easily let the final episode begin automatically following this finale. In this respect, the power of the death and the amount of time one has to sit with the event and its implications following the initial airing are shortened. However, when viewed in isolation, there is less of an opportunity for a comedic alleviation of the episode's somber mood. The Netflix platform thus allows the show to apply the same narrative techniques as a serialized drama show without having to commit wholeheartedly to the dramatic implications of such an intensely dark tonal shift, as the next episode, replete with jokes, is already available to relieve the viewer's sense of melancholy. So to conclude, the adult animation subgenre is a relatively small but important part of Netflix's attempts to create post-broadcast comedy programs. A show like BoJack Horseman has allowed the company to achieve a type of critical legitimation and award success that other animated shows, particularly on post-broadcast platforms, are rarely able to enjoy. The fact that this has been achieved as a result of the show's similarities to serial drama television with regards to both tone and narrativization are telling in what they reveal about hierarchies of genre, and specifically the way comedy is perceived as a genre by viewers. So I'll leave it there. Thank you. I'll just turn my screen sharing off.
Thanks so much, Tom. Okay, lots of questions there. So now we go over to Melissa.
All right, just open my share tray. Okay, I'm gonna try to start from the first slide. All right, can everybody see that? Doing good?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Fantastic. All right, so today I'm going to be talking to you about Good Taste, travel food series as quality television. I want to start with a content warning. This paper does very briefly mention self-harm and suicide. I don't get into any specifics, but it does mention them. The Q&A afterwards may also involve some of these questions, so just if you are prone to being triggered by this type of discussion or this particular content, just please be advised I am going to talk about it very briefly. All right, so I'm talking about the 4 series that are associated with the late Anthony Bourdain. Here we have a very brief history. So the first one was a cook's tour by the Food Network. It's built off Bourdain's success with a book, Kitchen Confidential. The goal is ostensibly looking for the quote-unquote perfect meal.
Melissa, I'm really sorry to interrupt,
yes.
but I think you're still on the first slide. So if you've gone to the next slide, you might have to do screen share instead of window share.
Okay. Let's see if I can figure out how to do that.
So if you stop sharing,
okay,
and then click screen share again, there should be share the entire screen.
Okay.
No?
No, what are you seeing right now? Is it
just the
title screen?
Yeah, the title.
Yeah, we're sort of looking. Yeah, there you go.
Okay,
I think if you just click on, yeah, okay.
Yeah, we'll just do it this way then.
Okay.
All right, sorry about that. Technology. It's my first day working with Teams. Right. So again, Cook's Tour is ostensibly looking for the quote-unquote perfect meal. That was subsequently followed by No Reservations by the Travel Channel, which ran from 2005 to 2012. These were hour-long episodes. Cook's Tour were 30-minute. And it's food as a way to learn about or talk with people from other cultures. This was nominated for a news documentary Emmy for the Beirut episode, and also won cinematography Emmys in 2009 and 2011. I'm assuming that's the correct spelling of the plural of Emmy. I really don't know. The Layover was another Travel Channel show from 2011 to 2013. This one is the most similar to other travel series. It gives you tips and advice, and here are things that you can see, and so on. It seems to have been made under protest, which you can get from some of the paratextual interviews. There is also continual on-camera subversion of it. And then finally, we have Parts Unknown from CNN, 2013 to 2018. This was the first CNN quote-unquote original series. It allowed a further move away from food and towards culture, history, ethnography, and the like. It is explicitly socially progressive and featured marginalized communities as a matter of course. The previous series did do this, but it became very prominent in Parts Unknown, and it won multiple Primetime Emmys and also a Peabody. All right. I have switched slides. I hope everybody sees that. So the basic ideas of sort of quality TV theory, and obviously as we go I will tell you about who's saying what. This is just to introduce it. It is of course a discursive construct. What isn't? Some arguments are that it's textually constructed, some are that it's more industrially or paratextually constructed, others audience constructed, some or all of the above is the approach that I'm taking for this particular one. So what I'm going to be doing is talking about some commonly agreed upon textual elements, industrial paratextual elements, and audience elements relating to quality TV, and showing how the series does or does not fit it. The various series. Series here is plural more often than not. Okay, so talking about some of the textual elements of quality. And these slides are by no means exhaustive. There is a great deal of text to deal with, but looking at a few of them. So complex characterization and narrative. So we have promotion of marginalized, poor, working class voices, experiences, as well as upper class. So we have this mix. If you want to think about it as the cultural capital omnivore from Bourdieu. There is explicit killing or butchering of animals for food. It is only for food. You don't see hunting for sport. So that's you can look at Schlutz on taboos. There are a lot of discussions of complicated, nuanced political and cultural issues, generally done in a humanizing and contextualizing way. This is something that comes up in the very little academic literature. Use and discussion of drugs, alcohol, and addiction. You do see this actually on the screen a lot. Bourdain being difficult to work with at times is acknowledged openly in both text and paratext, including by Bourdain himself. Sort of moral ambiguity of the character, here the televised persona, is another key element. I went back and forth about whether I thought Bourdain himself could be considered as an anti-hero. I tend to fall on the side that he's a little too focused on empathy, at least in the later series. But I think you can argue for him being an anti-hero or anti-heroic. There are references to self-harm from quite early on. It's generally done in voiceover after the fact, and they are ostensibly jokes. But again, that is sort of pushing the idea of narrative and character complexity. There's, of course, the association with the U.S., the idea of American quality television. American by accent and production team. It does tend to avoid or subvert American tourist stereotypes. Bourdain visits U.S. regions as well and treats them as if they were other cultures in the sense of respecting and interested in differences. Bourdain says this in multiple interviews, so this is paratextually supported as well. Also shows victims of U.S. wars and covert ops. You especially find this in the Vietnam and Laos episodes. And he questions and critiques various U.S. policies as well as policies of other countries. All right. And there is tonal variation. Each episode is tonally different intentionally in order to create distinction. Whether or not there is a flexi narrative or serial structure, I think is arguable. The whole ostensibly looking for the perfect meal thing from the cook's tour, while it does function as a framing device, you can kind of argue that as a sort of serial structure, but I will get back to that in a later slide. All right, looking at style as a very key signifier of distinction. So aural, there is a strong use of local musicians and voices. This started in No Reservations, but it really took off in Parts Unknown. So there is, accent, dialect, languages, and styles. You do occasionally hear Bourdain speaking French or Italian. There is a different, cultural odor, to use Iwabuchi's term, to each episode. So you can argue, I think, that this is designed with transnational sales in mind because of that. It does allow locals to speak for themselves, again, within limits. Limits are both externally and internally or self-imposed. This is explicitly stated in the first episode of Parts Unknown, which takes place in Myanmar. At the end, Bourdain is saying that they had contacted a lot of people to potentially do interviews and to speak with, who turned them down, saying that they feared government reprisals. The limits and other industrial elements in the series as construction are explicitly acknowledged in the text. So it regularly breaks the fourth wall. So we have it's a very postmodern series. And of course you have Bourdain's strong accent and a very casual, frequently profane speaking style. Visually, they have award-winning cinematography, so you have the cultural symbolic capital associated with distinction. There is also what they discuss as shooting from the hip. There are a couple of behind-the-scenes documentary episodes in both No Reservations and in Parts Unknown, which discuss this. Essentially, if you are holding a camera, normally you're a camera operator, it's being held something like this. It might be held a little bit like this. What the production team ended up doing instead was shooting from essentially the hip. So it would be tilted up. I have no idea if you can actually see what I'm doing, but it would be tilted up, but the camera would be held at the side, at the person's side. That way, you're not staring directly at this camera while you are talking to someone or while you are walking around with someone. The camera is being held at the side, and it's not in the direct vision. So it tends to give the person being filmed a more relaxed sense. This is how they're arguing, but it also creates a very distinctive style. And it's also very intertextual, frequently with film and or literature, so it's co-opting this cultural capital plus forming the distinctive style or brand. Here are some screenshots from No Reservations and Parts Unknown. The one on the top left is from the Rome episode, where they heavily borrowed from Fellini. This is from La Dolce Vita, the homage. And that particular episode was shot all in black and white. The two on the right are from the Hong Kong episode. So you see a stunt team that at the time was most well known for working with Jackie Chan, setting up wire work, which Bourdain then was involved in. He's on the wires. On the bottom one here, you see in editing, a digital hand coming in and erasing with a pencil eraser the wires. So this is very postmodern. The one on the bottom left is a shot from Congo, the Congo episode of Parts Unknown, and that episode was framed looking at Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. So, and those are just a few examples. There are loads. All right, industrial elements of quality. The idea of marketing is distinct. So it is explicitly generically mixed as travel food initially. So the cook's tour on Food Network. The Travel Channel's blurb or slogan was "Be a traveler, not a tourist." So again, this distinction. And then even just the title, Parts Unknown, i.e. new in different places. Bourdain is frequently characterized as a rock star or a bad boy, which is associated with boy bands, while simultaneously praised for storytelling skill and empathy. So again, we get this character complexity tied to narrative complexity, and there is a perceived authenticity about him as well. You can also argue for him, I think, as a pseudo-auteur. He's absolutely a metonym for the series. They didn't exactly have a showrunner, but he was an executive producer, at least on Parts Unknown and ultimately No Reservations. So I think you can argue that he fulfills that function. I'm also, and I haven't quite decided about this or not, whether he would be described in the same way as something like a war correspondent or other journalist. He explicitly stated that he was not a journalist. Frequently, again, you find this in a lot of the paratextual interviews. However, several journalists, including one in a remembrance book stated by Jason Rezaian, who's a writer for the Washington Post, he argued that Bourdain does qualify as a journalist. So, you can argue that. Transmedia presence, there are books and other publications. There's a book that goes with each series. Lots of public talks. There was a Travel Channel blog for No Reservations. With the Roads and Kingdoms website, there was Explore Parts Unknown, which was a digital series that went along with Parts Unknown. And of course, Bourdain's Twitter and Instagram accounts. And the idea of tying to other strong brands. CNN, you have casting intertexts. So there were intertexts with other Travel Channel shows, intertexts with Food Network shows, intertexts with a variety of television and filmmakers, etc. But this can also subvert them. So, for example, in the layover Atlanta, Food Network host Alton Brown and Bourdain went to a strip bar. And there are the various holiday episodes of No Reservations, which usually end up in violence and gunplay. All right, so reception, audience reception. Entellus et al., who's the editor, edited a collection of commemorative messages and articles for CNN. I have a copy of it right here. There are repeated assertions that by fans that Bourdain's work had made them see things differently, broadened their horizons, taught them in ways others could not, and or represented them in ways that others could not. It's distinct from earlier or others. I'll just read you a couple of them since I think my slides are full enough. Someone called Terry H., who is from West Virginia, which is historically very badly stereotyped in American media. Bourdain did a Parts Unknown episode. She said, Mr. Bourdain, thank you for coming to our state. Many of us loved you before that episode. Now you are revered by most of Southern West Virginia, our champion. Another one is Edwin O. In a time of fear and scapegoating of the other, Anthony Bourdain stood firmly as a voice against generalization of others, other people or countries. Heck, he was probably one of the best cultural ambassadors of the modern era. This book is full of these. Anecdotally, there are a lot of pre-mortem commemorations and assertions like this, as well as post-mortem ones. I was in a tattoo parlor in Metro Manila getting this, and at the table next to me, this was after Bourdain had died, just probably about 2 months, was someone getting a portrait of Bourdain's face done on their arm. I did not take a photo because that would have been weird. It is also, however, often connected to economics or tourism. A lot of the places Bourdain features have had their fortunes spring up, and this is actively done as well. In the Hanoi episode of Parts Unknown, Bourdain and now former President Obama had bun cha at a small restaurant, and that restaurant, which I have been there, and the bun cha is excellent. They have huge, basically screenshots on the wall of Bourdain and Obama. So there are also repeated assertions that the various series were Bourdain's personal journey. So does this qualify as a serial narrative kind of after the fact? Maybe. I think it's something that you could potentially argue. But of course, this book is commemorative, so very idealized, and it is curated by CNN and Bourdain's own publishing imprint. It's a cash grab, let's be honest. Pre-mortem reception is more difficult to find. This is just because copyright holders took down unauthorized videos and so on very quickly. Academic work is thin on the ground. Henry 2017 is a short but positive view of the post-colonialist parts unknown episodes in Africa, and that was a very short paper in and of itself. I think it was about 5 or 6 pages. All right, things to do with discourse when you're dead. Reference to the film. So HBO Max now shows all 4 series. So if we're arguing that HBO is the legitimator of what is or isn't quality, and I think you can, this does, at the very least, retroactively argue that this is a quality or considered a quality series, and it reinforces all of these extant discourses. It does continue to generate revenue for 0.0 ZPZ Productions and the Bourdain Trust. The trust, it's unclear if that was set up before or after his death. I consulted a friend who's a lawyer in New York State, and he said the phrase trust can be used for either. The publishing imprint does this as well. So there's World Travel and Irreverent Guide, which was published in April of 2021. It also, for those of you who are interested in this, it does feature a breakdown of each of these, well, not all of them, but a variety of the episodes in which film is being referenced. The conspiracy theories and or psychoanalyses of Bourdain and his death can arguably be thought of as analogous to forensic fandom, trying to figure out what happened. HBO Max has also co-produced a documentary that's now in theaters. So again, we have this increase in cultural capital from the increased cultural capital from being a film, being a documentary. It commemorates his life and arguably helps to grieve. Again, it also generates revenue. I confess I have not seen it, and I probably will not be able to until it's released on streaming. All right, so to conclude a bit, based on all the above, I'd argue that his corpus of work can be read as quality TV. I think confining both the concept and the academic study of quality purely to drama is this artificial separation. Based on, I'd argue, the lower cultural capital of lifestyle series like Food and Travel TV. The overall dearth of study on Bourdain in particular and travel food TV sort of generally, I think is probably a function of the fixation on quality TV and the ostensible opposite reality TV, so it's somewhere in between. Given the seeming impact of his work, and yes, admittedly mediated through his death, the travel food genre he inhabited and its overlaps with everything else would seem to be a viable area of future research. And I have a very select and unfortunately very small select bibliography, and I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Melissa. That was very rich, and I'm looking forward to discussing it further. But before we do, can I hand over to Tom? Tom May?
Hello, can everyone hear me? Yep, all right, I'll try and do this. Right. Entire screen, share.
Good
Can everyone hear me? Yeah, is that ready now?
Yeah.
Great. Right, so I'll start. So I'm going to provide a statistical and aesthetic analysis of Play for Today, its average shot lengths and framings of the body. So what is Play for Today? Well, it started as the Wednesday play 1964, and then it was renamed as Play for Today in 1970. This was on BBC One, like directly after the news, usually at 9:25 p.m, so straight after the news, which is sort of significant. There were around 20 one-off dramas a year within this 20-year period, which are generally associated with realism, but they're not totally realistic pieces. They are often very topical, sometimes very issue-based in terms of specific issues, and invariably seen as challenging. So my work for this particular presentation builds upon the foundations set in film studies by Barry Salt and David Bordwell, and for television studies Jeremy G. Butler. And also, more specifically, some instances of analysing editing pace in British TV dramas, so Hannah Andrews, Ian Potter and Les Cook. So there has been a very binary assumption that film is fast and video is slow. For instance, the writer and director David Hare, who worked on Play for Today, claimed that film is fast. True, of course, in the context of Battleship Potemkin, lots of silent era films, or any Michael Bay action film. And some video studio productions have deliberately opted for a slow aesthetic with very few cuts. I shot-logged Bed Among the Lentils from Alan Bennett's Talking Heads, and it has an ASL of 238. However, Hannah Andrews points out the more complicated picture. Hare's own filmed Play for Today, Licking Hitler, has a stately average shot length of 11.1, compared with Mike Leigh's filmed Play for Today, Nuts in May, which has an ASL of 8.4. Now, while this did derive from a stage play, so in a sense is more theatrical, it was filmed, Nuts in May. As Albert Hunt and Les Cook have argued, the slowness in Talking Heads suits the drama's intimacy with director Alan Bennett, who's also directs it. His camera's slow and almost imperceptible movements towards Maggie Smith are capturing her real-time performance. David Hare's recent Hugh Laurie starring drama Roadkill is faster than Licking Hitler, or indeed most Plays for Today, but it is for me less gripping, infinitely less strong in its ideas and its characters than an average Play for Today. So, wanting to test the hypothesis that this sort of Hare hypothesis that video would be slower and film faster, I started by identifying a sample of 30 Plays for Today, 10% of the total, which is around 300. I carefully selected the sample to ensure there were a proportionate number per year, and also video and film productions, so 10 film productions and 20 video ones. I began to shot log following Jeremy G. Butler's very helpful instructions on his website in using VLC player, opening with Licking Hitler, actually, David Hare's all-filmed Play for Today of 1978. I began this mammoth undertaking on the 7th of October 2019. So 22 months later, I have loads of these folders in my Dropbox. I've managed to shot log all 30 sampled places today, gathering screenshots at the beginning of every shot. You can see the opening minutes of Kisses at 50 there, pretty fast, those opening minutes. So here are some of my overall findings presented here. As you can see, the difference between film and video is negligible, which utterly disproves the notion that Play for Today's video style, would be slower in its editing speed than film. If anything, video is slightly faster by 0.17 seconds. However, the difference is so small, given my small sample, which needs to be maybe 20% at least, I'd say. I won't be drawing any bold conclusions that videoed Play for Today are necessarily faster yet, anyway. So further reality check needed to this mooted film video binary comes with awareness that many BBC drama productions of the 1970s and 80s, beyond just Play for Today, were not simply all done in the studio on video, or outside, all film productions, but were film video hybrids. I found in my viewing of the sample that what I had thought were 10 films and 20 video productions just weren't. Only 8 of the 20 video productions were 100% shot on video. 12 were film video hybrids with a range of 7 and 41% of screen time consisting of filmed shots. Thus, film was a bigger slice of the Play for Today story, often used to embellish and open out Plays for Today with a primarily video aesthetic. As was recorded on the previous slide, over 40% of the total duration of my Play for Today sample was filmed, whereas just under 2/3 was videoed. So in this paper, I'm going to expand on Les Cook's analysis of Kisses at 50, 1973. Hybrid, which is 41% film and 59% video, I found, which is thus almost exactly representative of the overall strand from my findings. I will go on to argue today that this hybrid form is the neglected mainstay of Play for Today. It did indeed potentially give the shrewd director the best of both film and video aesthetics. So you can see here with this line graph, the orange line represents films, all films really, that are shot logged in Barry Salt's extensive Cinemetrics database online. And the blue line represents Play for Today, my sample. Evidently, my smaller sample size means there's going to be more fluctuations in contrast to Salt's fairly steady yearly averages, which show films as usually having average shot lengths of between 7 and 8 seconds, as you can see there. Of course, as we saw in my previous evidence, Play for Today has a mean average shot length of around 9 seconds. Interestingly, Play for Today was fastest circa its greatest popularity in 1976, 1977, and 1980. So I can correlate it a bit with viewing figures. So Barry Salt's claim that the higher the pretensions, the longer the take may have some truth. However, Play for Today's pretensions were more to encourage critical social thinking in viewers, as we'll see later with a very specific Play for Today film style I've identified. So here we have 2 top 5 sort of league tables, showing the 5 fastest and the 5 slowest from my sample of 30 Plays for Today. The most repeated and probably most famous Play for Today of all, Mike Leigh's Abigail's Party, is actually the fastest too, with 5.33 ASL. Slowest is the far lesser known, but in my opinion very good, Breath, with a leisurely ASL of 17.1. My findings can actually be seen via a representational lens too, so I can link it to representation. You may have spotted that all 10 directors listed there were men. However, 4 of the 5 slowest were written by women. Breath by Elaine Feinstein, A Sudden Wrench by Paula Milne, The After Dinner Joke by Carol Churchill, and Sorry by Carol Bunyan. So these plays have a more ruminative editing pace, which grants extensive time and space to their women protagonists, who you can see occupying the frame in the screenshots there, often privileged in close-up or medium close-up shots as the sort of sole character. In these 5 plays of today, conversations have primacy over action. The 5 women actors who you can see there were all first billed in the end credits. From the top left to the right, I've got Angela Pleasance in Breath, Queenie Watts in Waterloo Sunset, Rosemary Martin in A Sudden Wrench, and on the bottom, Paula Wilcox in The After Dinner Joke, and Meg Davies in Sorry. So these gynocentric Plays for Today, which we may see as more analogous to intimate theatrical aesthetics, weren't all multi-camera video studio productions. I mean, The After Dinner Joke and Sorry were. However, Breath was shot on film. Waterloo Sunset is a video-led hybrid, and A Sudden Wrench was shot wholly on video using outside broadcast equipment, creates a very everyday feel of realism. None of which is to make a binary point that the 5 fastest are androcentric necessarily. There are substantial parts for women in those, for Laurie Wells, Christine Hargreaves, Paula Tilbrook, and of course, Alison Steadman. Talk also takes primacy in those, but there is quicker intercutting between more characters, you could say. So, video. There are great benefits to a slow video aesthetic, as we see in A Sudden Wrench, Sorry, and The After Dinner Game. The emphasis is squarely on the writer's words. Video is far better at capturing sustained performances, whether of individual actors or ensembles, which communicate those words. Film, with its richer capturing of real locations, can distract attention away from dialogue and complex ideas. Thus, Trevor Griffiths' work is perfectly suited to video. Many plays of today contain dramatic monologues, which are generally shot on video. Perfect, sensitively capturing long takes, such as June Brown in Sorry there, who was given a scene 8 minutes and 10 seconds duration, which is a single shot. However, there is a strain of faster video plays for today, which uses the multi-camera studio aesthetic, Abigail's Party being 100% video. Fast ones also include video-led hybrids, Kisses at 50, Angels Are So Few, and Mummy and Daddy, whose 20 minutes or so of film sequences are all that survive of a very odd 1973 play for today. The Richard Wilson directed Under the Hammer sees Wilson cutting significantly faster with video than with film. I don't believe it. You'd better, as it is indeed the same fine man. Director, you know, the actor. This is also the case with Paul Seed on Too Late to Talk for Billy, 1982, and Matthew Robinson on The Odd Folly, Doran's Box, 1976. And most markedly, Michael Apted on Kisses at 50, whose video shots are on average 3.45 seconds faster than the film shots. The film shots add a rootedness and sort of atmosphere to Kisses at 50, but Apted uses the multiple cameras in the studio to swoop in close among the characters, like Lee on Abigail's Party, cut very briskly to gain telling reaction shots from the array of characters in the Yorkshire pub, so the pub scenes particularly. I've identified 2 contrasting film styles as well. The first is inspired by Gangsters and other BBC Birmingham efforts, rather faster than Breath, which was also made from Pebble Mill. It is what I term pacey regional populism. These filmed plays of today build towards the 1980s renaissance in popularity for the British film industry. You know, Chariots of Fire sort of onwards, 1981 onwards. And indeed, they are TV films giving talented crew members the experience to enable this wider cinematic revival, as Mike Leigh and David Hare have argued. Of course, there's Channel 4, Film on 4 coming into the frame as well. The image there on the left is from Brian Glover and Tara Prem's Thicker Than Water, broadcast in January 1980, and filmed on location in a Lancashire abattoir, the Southampton Docks, and then a French town hosting a Black Pudding Festival, which an array of Northerners travel to in order to compete on an annual basis. It's sort of a yearly ritual that they have. It also touches very movingly on memories of the Second World War, this particular play. It is by turns shocking, ebullient, and melancholy. Its average shot length is really pacey. It's 6.85. Similarly fast cut, places today, shot away from London, were Back of Beyond, 1974, shot in the Welsh borders. and Chance of a Lifetime, shot in Teesside, though it should be noted Wales and the North East aren't that well represented generally in Play for Today. It's a bit of a gap in its representation generally, and there are exceptions. The second style adopts a sedate Brechtian gaze, where the directors steer the spectator to have a critical gaze upon an insight into institutional environments which are failing the Play for Today underdog protagonists. The camera is very often still, eschewing movement, encouraging spectators to analyse power relations within the frame. Play for Today examples broadly within this subset include Roland Joffé, who directed The Spongers, Charles Stewart with Billy, and Richard Eyre in The Historical Country. Performances are de-emphasised compared to stark framings of corridors, courtrooms, or social security offices. Slow cutting emphasises entrapment. Stillness stresses the stasis in characters' situations. Its cold framings and deliberative pace encourages the audience to observe, and analyse, and apply to the real world outside the fiction. So more Brechtian than Shakespearean in approach. The image is from G.F. Newman's Billy, shown in November 1979, a complex, downbeat social realist Play for Today about the title character, a battered child, his family, the courts, and the social services. Its ASL is 12.06. And it was pretty much as popular as The Spongers, getting a very big audience, around 10 million watched it. But it's much more neglected compared with The Spongers, I think. So finally, the last sort of element of this talk is the hybrid, which, as we have seen, is a statistically very significant Play for Today aesthetic form, and I'd argue is often particularly rich. My case study is not Rocky, but one you may not have heard of from the same year. Play for Today's Rocky Marciano is Dead, written by the now 94-year-old Jewish playwright Bernard Kopps, and directed by Graham Evans. It's a boxing drama about Harry, played by a very famous actor Ron Moody there, you can see on the left, an old boxer and coach living in multicultural Camden, aiming to bring a young lad called Sonny, played by Jeffrey Cassoon, who appears in the clips on the right, to bring him to stardom. This is actually a little bit faster cut than Rocky, actually, I've checked. 8.04 ASL to the Stallone film's 8.41. While only 12.8% of its duration is on film, those sections enhance and I would say broaden its appeal, perhaps. But we get very much the best of the slower type of Play for Today video aesthetic, where characters and ideas are granted time and space, as in the left-hand clip, where Harry is telling Sonny about the commonalities between Jewish and Black experiences in sort of London history. While you can only see one cut in the GIF there, the whole scene has an ASL of 8.28. On the right is the ensuing later sequence where Harry trains Sonny. Director Graham Evans vividly, rapidly intercuts fast video and film here, while framing fast movements. This whole scene has an ASL of 3.21, statistically identical to Star Wars's editing pace. So compare the cutting speeds of the two GIFs there. I've shown it deliberately shown an even starker contrast in the 30-second extract I've used here compared with the whole scene. So overall, I would say the hybrid case of Rocky Marciano is Dead is like a wonderful fusion of Play for Today's socio-political discursiveness with Hollywood sports movie. Even if it foregrounds the male body more than the discursive gynocentric Play for Today I mentioned, Rocky Marciano is Dead is the epitome of Play for Today's fruitful film video hybrid form. Evans and Kopps give Leslie Dunlop a good amount of space and time too, Sonny's girlfriend, Sue. So I've been Tom May. Thank you for listening. I thank Rachel Queen, Billy Smart, Ian Greaves, John Wyver, and Simon Farquhar for helping on a lot of different things. Thanks for listening. I look forward to answering any questions you have and taking on board any advice or thoughts you have as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stop sharing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tom. Elka, I suppose we open up questions, but as I've got the floor, I thought I would sort of set us off. I mean, thank you so much for these three incredibly rich papers, you know, starting with Tom, who's helping us, I suppose, rethink or revalue the cultural capital of adult animation and rethinking definitions of quality as we go. You know, Melissa, with this exploration of the discursive category of quality through the career of Bourdain, and I really want to, I suppose, have a longer discussion. It's a pity we can't go to the bar to discuss the post-mortem discourse there. And then
it's a little early for me to drink.
Yeah, we do. And Tom, you've finished us with this incredibly rich paper on, you know, how kind of quality is being sort of defined through sort of production techniques and editing, and in a way what you're giving us here is a sense of these very sort of you know, UK markers of quality through the drama. And I mean, interesting, you've got this issue of time, which I'd like to sort of talk about. So okay, so where do I start? Okay, so I think the first question that I've got is you know, and I think this is really related to sort of Tom and Melissa to start with, because you're dealing with television which is relatively contemporary. And I'm really interested in how you're thinking about this definition, this discursive idea of quality, in how your texts move into different territories, not only across platforms, but also across you know, various sort of territories itself. I mean, something like CNN, for example, you know, reaches the world. It's not just sort of seen in one place. I do have questions for Tom about time, which links, I think, with this shift, because I just was intrigued to think about how, because at the end of the day, you know, the 1970s to 84 is talking about a very sort of specific time within television history itself, as you well know, and you know better than I. But how they sort of defined that and then redefined it. I mean, I was really interested in what you were saying about the sort of hybridity model, and you know, it's interesting because I'm just rewatching Inspector Morse from the beginning. Don't ask why, but I am, and it's really interesting to sort of see definitions of what Granada meant by quality shifting from the late 80s until, and that it moved really quickly. And I think there's something else going on there with what you're saying, Tom. So it'd be interesting to come back. So if we could maybe start with the issue around, you know, shifting definitions of quality through different platforms and different territories related to, you know, Melissa and Tom.
I can start. Yeah, so I mean, like I said in my paper, BoJack Horseman was one of the earlier Netflix original shows, and I think when Netflix first started creating these original programs, they were really wanting to put themselves sort of following this tradition of HBO, right? And in their programming, you've got House of Cards, which there's been writing on that about how it's you know, its episodes are called chapters. There's almost this like literary quality to it, and I feel like when they did their comedy shows at first as well, and you know, BoJack Horseman being one of the first of those, they also didn't want to just do something that you might get on, you know, broadcast TV like Fox, like The Simpsons or Family Guy. Not that there isn't value in that. Yeah, so it's unsurprising, I think, that originally the first sort of stuff they were putting out there was shifting between comedy and drama, and BoJack sort of really leaned into the drama, I think, as it progressed. It was a lot funnier when it first started, and then they sort of found their niche there, I guess. That has changed, I think, more recently. You now see a lot of varied programming on Netflix. lots of sort of reality shows, things that you might find on broadcast TV. So yeah, I do want to stress that this is, this isn't the case for every Netflix original show, but it's one that I thought was interesting, and especially when Netflix started, they wanted to be viewed as, somewhere you could get quality TV.
But because what I was intrigued in when you were talking was that, because it is Netflix and it's pushed out into the world, is that kind of quality read similar in the same in the States to the UK, to Europe, to Australia? That's I suppose what I'm getting at, and that obviously you're talking about those kind of quality markers which have sort of been legitimized elsewhere, and I think you really made a very convincing case for thinking about the hierarchy within the genre by defining what it's not to the other adult animations. But I'm just wondering if these that sort of sense of quality for BoJack Horseman is seen the same, say like in Australia as opposed to the UK, for example.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is one to throw out to other people. I personally, yes, I watch a lot of American TV. I watch some British TV as well. So to me, it came across that way. And I think if you have watched a lot of those shows which are usually spoken about in the conversation with quality TV, like The Wire and Breaking Bad and stuff like that, you can see sort of like the similarities between those shows and things like BoJack. So it's definitely following a tradition, I think.
Thank you. And Melissa, just thinking of this discursive category that you were riffing with, and how being processed through different platforms and different shows, different definitions that emerge.
Yeah, I mean, the all 4 series went to streaming after the fact, so after Bourdain had passed. So you get the sort of double quality dose, doubling up of the cultural capital from streaming, and from it actually being on HBO Max, so that legitimation. In terms of how it is received abroad, in addition to the 90 million references in the commemoration book, I've shown episodes of No Reservations and episodes of Parts Unknown to students in South Korea and in Pakistan. And in Pakistan, it was Karachi. It was part of a course looking at essentially Western travel documentary in a global context. So it's a combination of representation and transnational TV, basically. All the students like different things, as you would expect. They all have different backgrounds. What was particularly interesting to me in Pakistan, because I did not just show Bourdain's stuff, I showed them Rick Steves and various other things, some Michael Palin. They really gravitated towards Bourdain because of the fact that he did not seem to be judging or explaining. So there was some elucidation, of course, but it was really the power aspect of it. Not that he's necessarily power negative. He's not, as he explicitly states in a lot of the different episodes. The Madagascar one of Parts Unknown is particularly clear on this. But they responded specifically to, he looks like he's there to learn. That's actually a quote from one of my students. And you find this in Henry's discussion of the sort of post-colonialist arguments in the Africa episodes, which I think at that point were, I think there had been 4 or 5 Africa episodes at the point that came out. Pointing out nuance, looking at the human faces of people, less, this is what this is, and more, here is my experience and enjoy it. And that does seem to correspond with what I've read so far. Bourdain did do an Armenia episode. I plan to show it to students when I get there at some points. And I do think I don't think you can do a global study. There aren't enough hours in a day, and I do occasionally need to sleep. But a targeted study, let's say, built on maybe anecdotal evidence of a few different countries doing some probably online audience research at this point, just because it's hard to travel with the pandemic. But you can ask people to fill out forms for you. So it's something I've considered doing. It's currently on a back burner because I'm just buried in work at the moment. But I do think it would be useful. And one of the questions that would be asked is, how do you define quality TV? So that will help figure that out. Yeah.
Because that's something that really interested me with what you were talking about, is around kind of questions about taste. And I've been watching the Stanley Tucci Italy, which is for CNN. And I think it's really interesting to sort of see this performance of a cosmopolitan international taste that is around food and wine and travel, and how, it's the best of. And interesting enough, he was in Rimini. Where did he have a drink? Obviously at the Grand Hotel. Lovely Fellini references, and it's very interesting that Gordon was saying. So that you're even referencing, that cultural capital of a cosmopolitan sort of traveling elite, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, there's really a lot to work with, not just because I've lost count of how many episodes there actually are of all four series, but there is a huge text, and the fact of his death and of the manner of his death, which again I'm not going to get into specifics, that also I think in a weird and arguably disturbing sort of way amps up that ambiguity, amps up that even the forensic fandom idea, which again draws all these connotations of quality. So yeah, it's a fascinating subject.
And especially, I mean, the way HBO, you've seen them do this with Richard Pryor, with Robin Williams. Obviously, they've got the archive anyway, so that's why they're recycling it. But at the same time, that there is something there around this, deification almost to these figures.
Yeah, and I think there's a profit motive to it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tom, if we can sort of think about this question about time in relation to your thesis, although it might be so cut and dry, because when you were showing us the lists, the programs were literally paralleling each other. So, but I just wondered if there was a shift. That's, I suppose, what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I think film becomes increasingly more prestigious as the time goes on. Obviously, it's there to begin with Up the Junction and Cathy Come Home in 1965 and 1966, and very specifically associated with that realism of the London streets. But yeah, it becomes more associated with heritage and literary adaptations from Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy onwards from 1979, which is BBC Two, and Brideshead Revisited 81, and The Jewel in the Crown 1984, and those two are both Granada.
Yeah,
the sort of saying. And yeah, Inspector Morse, I suppose it's contemporary, but it is very much the place of Oxford as sort of a character and also a sort of tourist exhibit to get the international audiences in. I mean, of course, brilliant performances from John Thor and Kevin Whately captured on film, but I don't know, I think something was maybe lost with the way the studio aesthetic got slagged off, traduced as sort of always overlit. I think that's unfair, really, that it depended on each director, really. So there would have been some bad examples of it being poorly done practice, but there were lots of great examples still in the 80s for it. So I think that was a bit of a shame that was lost, because it's so actor centric and performance centric. It captures a lot of brilliant performances in the Playford LA archive that I've been watching. But yeah, I suppose the contemporary film side is more the film on 4, with My Beautiful Laundrette being like probably the best known example from the mid 80s. That really is a really strong piece, and that was Stephen Frears, who directed many plays for today as well, and that seems like a sort of update of it. But yeah, it seems to that contemporaneity seems to maybe decline, other than Film on 4 to an extent. And then Film on 4 is quite transnational as well. There are a lot of co-productions by the mid-80s. I think Paris, Texas was a Film on 4 production that was shown on Channel 4 and stuff. But, it becomes a bit less. There's a bit less focus on the regions, say. So there's less focus on the north of England than there had been. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I agree with how it sort of set a sort of different set of criteria around issues around quality. That I mean, I was really kind of struck when you were sort of talking about the sort of situatedness. I mean, for example, atmosphere and location are a key thing now within sort of definitions of say Nordic noir, for example, and that's one of their markers of quality. But it's interesting looking at with Inspector Morse again, that again the editing seems to be much quicker at the beginning and then much more sort of languorous towards the end. So I suppose I'm just trying to get your sense of within the play for today, between 1970 and 84, what markers of quality did they establish and then sort of reference and then sort of pull back into the works themselves.
I think there is there's a tendency in some of these filmed ones to be more languorous, like Country, the Trevor Griffiths historical drama, and The Spongers and Billy in a different way, in a very contemporary social realist sort of vein, where the performances are very important. Christine Hargreaves, of course, is the main tragic figure in The Spongers, but they're situated in these very powerfully defined institutional corridors and offices. These characters being crushed. It's a more, I don't know, it's a more left-wing, politically charged take on quality. Yeah. So you're going to get in the period dramas of Granada, say. So it's very, very much seems up to date in how it sort of comes across for its time.
So thank you, Tom. Christine Garrity, can you switch your mic on and ask your question?
Yes, this has been an extremely interesting panel with impossibly diverse papers, and all of which were really good and well presented. But it strikes me as really impossible and rather depressing, actually, if we found that criteria of quality ran across national television broadcasting and genres and periods of time and what have you. So that while Melissa has rather beautifully demonstrated the kind of quality TV argument in that food genre, I'm not sure that sticking the food genre into that framework of quality TV, or sticking Place for Today into that framework, or even the comedy that the other Tom is talking about, is necessarily, it seems like imposing something on these programs rather than allowing them to breathe. But perhaps that's too broad brush and a bit unfair.
Well, I can answer that a little bit, at least for mine. I think if you think of quality TV here in the sense of that's the milieu that these shows are being developed in. So maybe don't see it so much as an imposition on, other than me saying, don't automatically devalue this type of show. See it as this is the industrial context, as well as the audience context, how the audience has been sort of taught, I guess, to interpret things, as well as how the filmmakers have been taught and or learned how to make their show. So it may not necessarily be imposing a framework so much as recognizing those threads within all of those elements. So thinking of it more like context, while also basically just saying don't automatically devalue something because it's not drama or because it's maybe in the same Emmys category as reality TV.
But having spent practically a lifetime defending British drama against people who say, oh, but we can't do The Wire, you know.
I'm sure you could do a very good version of The Wire. It would be totally different to the American version, but I'm sure it would be wonderful. I love British TV.
Yeah, I completely take your point, Christine, as well. I think for me, once again, it's the case that Netflix sort of positioned themselves as a successor to these cable networks like HBO when they first started making stuff, at least, and then thinking about the sort of referentiality in a show like BoJack, which is constantly referring to other types of other sorts of broadcast television comedy, and then doing something sort of different, make it, sort of like stressing that this is one thing and we're trying to be a little bit more serious or something like that, fitting into that category, I guess. So I guess that's the angle that I come at BoJack from.
Yeah.
Tom, do you have a response?
I think it's perhaps a somewhat artificial category to impose on it, although the extent to which it was seen as prestigious certainly by BBC bosses and critics is worth commenting on, that it was sort of a flagship programme, and I found some evidence of that, certainly, and like the amount it was reviewed in the Daily Telegraph, it literally was every single Play for Today was reviewed by Sean Day-Lewis or Richard Last or whoever. It was like a requirement, part of the national sort of conversation in that way. But yeah, the word quality itself, I'm less sure how much we'll have to use that.
I mean, it occurs to me, and sort of in response to what you're saying there, Christine, because I mean, you're one of those kind of sort of discursive markers that is used to define. It is what came across for me with all these papers is that sense of defining something by what it's not as well, and it is a sense of that legitimizing element that's going on to position these shows wherever within the landscape. But again, I think there's also the issue that which is what I was, I suppose, getting at, that one person's sense of quality is not necessarily another person's if you move it somewhere else, and then it looks something else. So that's what has been so rich about this conversation in terms of these shifting definitions. I think it's Clara says maybe the quality television as branding for these shows, so that question of branding comes into the debate, and Elke, that the industrial context is also really critical here. Claire, Bordeaux particularly appears to have travelled from cheap cable to rerun filler into quality. I mean, I think that's I'm getting that's something I was trying to sort of get at, that you kind of look at it with new eyes and then it looks like something else. So, again, that sense of where this stuff is, like Tom, at the end of the day, Play for Today is positioned in a very important place within the schedule, so that there's value in where these shows are. Okay, so are there any other questions? Because I'm very aware that we've come to the end of our session. Elke, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, nothing relating to the panel, only to say that obviously the next session is not until Wednesday at 1 o'clock, and we've got 3 sessions on Wednesday. I'll send out the email as always with the links.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think it only leaves me to thank Tom and Melissa for their fantastic